people working on a full-time basis and a full-time job getting part-time income.
I hate to say it, but all the hell broke loose.
My God, I don't know what's happening here.
All labor has dignity.
The signs read, I am a man.
Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee.
In February 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee, some 1,300 sanitation workers, members of Local 1733 of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, began a strike.
Back then, sanitation workers only made about $1.25 per 9-hour workday. That amounted to $56.25 a week. Many of them were trying to support families on such a small income. Those same black sanitation workers were called walking buzzards.
Low wages, terrible working conditions, and the deaths of Ethel Cole and Robert Walker ignited the strike in Memphis. On February 1st, 1968, Cole and Walker took shelter from torrential rain in the back of a garbage truck. That garbage truck malfunctioned, crushing the pair to death. They had no pension, no life insurance, and the city of Memphis refused to help pay for burial costs.
Days later, on February 12th, hundreds of sanitation workers refused to go to work using the now famous slogan, I am a man. On February 14th, Mayor Henry Loeb issued an ultimatum telling the men to return to work. Some did, most did not. And more than 10,000 tons of garbage piled up in Memphis.
If one black person suffers, if one black person is down, we are all down.
The tragedy and the uproar that followed brought Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to Memphis the very next month.
He stood right here in this church, Mason Temple, addressing the masses March 18th, 1968.
Whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth.
Dr. King's dream transcended races. He aimed to tackle poverty, criminal justice reform, voting rights, and education discrimination. 50 years later, is that dream a reality?
I've been here 64 years, and I'm still working.
Elmore Nickelberry, 86 years old and still working on a City of Memphis garbage truck. He started at 21, fresh off the battlefields of the Korean War.
That's the way it happened. You go over there and fight, then you come back to the United States and get on another battlefield. So that's the way it happened. It's something you had to do because you had kids to feed.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to Memphis to help striking city sanitation workers like Nickelberry. They worked in poor conditions, the pay hardly enough to make ends meet.
It was hard when I started working, but it's much easier now because we got them cots and we got a lift that lift up and everything. At first, we had to tow tubs on our head, go in people's backyard, and stuff went all down my head, all down my back, and I couldn't go home. I had to pull off my clothes before I go in the house because all the maggots be in my clothes.
After King's assassination, the eyes of the world focused on Memphis and forced then Mayor Henry Loeb to recognize the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, or AFSCME, which represented the sanitation workers.
Even the $2 an hour that we had suggested and that we had proposed and that we had demanded, even if that was incorporated into a reality, it still would not put all of the employees that we represent out of the poverty line and out of the poverty bracket.
AFSCME eventually bargained for and gained better pay and conditions improved. But until recently, many were forced to work into their most senior years, like Nickelberry.
One for the garbage department, this city would be messed up. This city would be messed up. If we stopped for about 2 months, garbage would be piled up just about high as my shoulder.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. took an assassin's bullet fighting for the rights of sanitation workers here in Memphis and people around the world.
But given where we are today, some have questioned whether he died in vain.
The poverty rate then and now for Shelby County are almost the same at just over 20%.
So just picture filling up FedEx Forum 10 times over. That's how many people are living below the poverty line, and it's much worse for children and African Americans.
You are here to demand that Memphis will see the poor.
A demand for dignity, a call for justice.
America does not use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty.
That 50 years later,
there might as well be a sign at the door saying, "No colored allowed."
Some say has still gone unanswered.
It tells the story of a city that's stuck.
Despite all the time that's passed, a city and a people still trapped in poverty.
If you are poor, you are not free.
I've been in Memphis all my life.
29-year-old Tamika Johnson grew up in South Memphis. Born to a mother that battled addiction, she and her siblings were split up at an early age and sent to live with family members. Johnson dropped out of school in the 10th grade after having her first child, but immediately began working to earn a living.
So I just had to get up and do it. Everything I know now, I had to learn on my own.
In more ways than one, she's literally a survivor.
That was in you for 6 years.
Yes, ma'am.
Johnson showed us a bullet doctors removed just last year. Johnson was shot in 2011, sleeping in her own bed with her infant daughter, caught in the crossfire of a nearby robbery.
It was a hard thing to do because I had to make it from my room to the front door to get help.
Years later, Johnson's wounds have healed, but the scars are harder to get rid of. She moved out of the now closed 2-lane apartments, hoping to ensure her family's safety, but then lost the security of a roof over their heads. A vicious cycle was repeating itself.
And then we stayed in like hotels for months, Roma houses. It was just uncomfortable for my children just have to see and just have to go through that. Coming down the hall.
Johnson now has her own place thanks to a program called Family Promise. It's not all furnished yet, but it's hers.
It was like a little struggle, but they say you have to go through something to have a better outcome.
Each day, Johnson takes her kids to school, then leaves her North Memphis home for her job at a discount store in Hickory Hill. She makes $7.50 an hour, and with rent at $650 a month, tries to get as much overtime as possible. Johnson may not have a lot, but is determined to provide for her kids.
I don't like depending on nobody, and you have to start somewhere. Even though you making minimum wage, you can work yourself from the bottom and come up to the top.
But what if statistics show that even when you try, for some, that glass ceiling is nearly impossible to break?
Dr. King said eradicating poverty would take billions of dollars and decades of commitment. But in the very community where he gave his last speech, 6 out of 10 Memphians live in poverty today.
It makes me feel sad. It makes me feel, did Dr. King die in vain?
Dr. Elena De La Vega is an assistant professor of social work at the University of Memphis and author of the Poverty Report, Memphis Since MLK, a report revealing poverty has gotten worse and so has the gap between blacks and whites.
How should Memphians feel about the reality of where we are?
I think African Americans should be proud and whites should be ashamed.
Despite gains in education and employment, the poverty rate for African Americans in Shelby County is 3 times higher than whites. Roughly half of all black children are living in poverty, 4 times the number of white children. And the median income for African Americans is just over $35,000 compared to nearly $70,000 for whites. Meaning today, like in 1968, African Americans in Shelby County are still earning half of their white counterparts.
What we have here is a resistant problem of inequality and unfairness.
De La Vega has conducted additional research showing higher median incomes and lower poverty rates in northern cities with similar demographics, causing her to believe the real reason lies in black and white.
There are a lot of things that lead me to believe that there's racial discrimination here at work.
And according to De La Vega, it could all change.
Poverty is manufactured. What we choose to pay somebody, how we choose to talk about them, and how we choose to value somebody's labor is something that we can control.
It's always been about cheap labor, cheap land.
Historically, the Memphis economy was built on the backs of black workers. And consultant Tom Jones says our leaders have made choices along the way that have kept our community and many of its people in the same position.
Choices in economic development to go with low-paying jobs, low-skilled jobs, not improve the workforce.
According to Jones, the power to create prosperity for all will take some reimagination, but if we do, the possibilities are endless.
We were willing to spend a lot of money to chase Amazon. What if we took the approach that we can create that sort of economic impact by growing our own workforce, improving our workforce, improving incomes.
Improvements that would mean 50 years from now, the numbers will tell a different story about Memphis and about families like Johnson's hoping to break the cycle for generations to come.
If I had the chance opportunity, I want to go and get a better high-paid job. I want to finish school, and I just want to make sure my kids happy.
Dr. King was a champion for the poor, and he had been for years. In fact, he launched the Poor People's Campaign in 1967.
The plan was intended to bring poor people from across the country together for a new march on Washington. They were there to demand better jobs, better homes, and better educations.
The Poor People's Campaign consisted of specific demands: $30 billion for an anti-poverty effort, full-time jobs, guaranteed income, and the annual construction of thousands of affordable homes.
You are reminding not only Memphis, but you are reminding the nation that it is a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive starvation wages.
Soon after launching the campaign, King aligned with the struggle of the black sanitation workers in Memphis.
The Southern Christian Leadership Conference also played a major role in the Poor People's Campaign and the fight for equality. Some of what they fought for is coming to fruition right now in Memphis.
The Reverend Dr. Ralph Abernathy was the president in 1968. The Poor People's Campaign of that same year was meant to dramatize the plight of America's poor of all races and push for a better life.
I just want to do God's will.
Since its inception in 1957, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference has been about getting members of the clergy involved in political activism. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was the SCLC's first president. He was a Baptist preacher. Now Dr. Charles Still Jr. serves as president. Still says the organization is just as relevant as it was during the days of Dr. King.
I don't care what kind of job you have, what your status is. You got there because of SCLC. All major legislation and all major acts that was passed, with the exception of 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, was done by SCLC.
Before Dr. Still, the Reverend Dwight Montgomery served as SCLC president. Reverend Montgomery passed away late last year. He said Dr. King's legacy lives on.
I think that he would be very proud. We have an awesome national president who has a deep commitment to fighting against poverty.
It's 2018, and a lot of changes have taken place since 1968. Racial inclusion has come a long way in many workplaces, and living conditions for some have improved.
I'm counter help, and I help out in the back around here.
Joyce Caldwell works at Mercury Valley Cleaners on Madison Avenue. Mike Cooper is her boss, but to her, he's more than that.
When I got here with Mike, it was a whole different color. Him and Miss Betty are, some of the nicest people, no racism anywhere at all. Sometimes I get him confused with being my brother instead of my boss.
Cooper says Dr. King is the reason the two have such a good relationship.
The man gave the ultimate price, and what I have gained out of it are some really beautiful things. I never know what color my next friend will be, and it doesn't matter.
So that's what Dr. King fought for economic and social justice.
Now back to the timeline. King spoke to the masses on March 18th. He promised to come for a march headed by the SCLC. That march on March 28th began peacefully but ended in chaos.
The march began to move from Claiborne Temple at Pontotoc Hernando about 5 minutes till 11 o'clock.
Let's face it, he came to have a march with the sanitation workers. They were very nonviolent.
Reverend Andrew Young was present for the chaos unfolding in Memphis in 1968. Young was a pastor, former executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and confidant of Dr. King. He says March 28th was meant to be peaceful. It was anything but.
Windows being broken, more windows being broken on Beale. More windows, and that's in a pawn shop right on the corner.
Busted windows, looting, fires, more of the mayhem halted the March 28th demonstration. Dozens of people were hurt in the chaos, and police arrested nearly 300 people. Unrest was stirring across the nation because of the unfair treatment of blacks.
This has been a wild, unruly crowd with broken windows, shouts of black power. The ones that are in charge of this have had no control over it whatsoever.
Some say police started the mayhem. Others say black protesters started rioting.
He has left the march, and Martin Luther King has left the march.
Events from that day went down in history as the reason Dr. King left Memphis in March, but he vowed to return in April, not knowing his life would end in Memphis, Tennessee.
But it was very clear that from the speech that he was prepared to move on up a little higher.
It could be a long night in Memphis.
The civil rights movement pressed on with countless arrests, intimidation tactics by lawmakers, and many more issues on the legal side of things. And it was because the movement threatened the status quo.
Today, remnants of Jim Crow show up in legal proceedings, arrests, and the crime rate in the South, including right here in Memphis. Memphis is ranked as one of the most dangerous cities in the country.
But some say the economic state goes hand in hand with startling crime stats. So we explore what can be fixed.
The one that was over the Walmart I was at, he came to me one day and explained it to me. And I was like, huh? Because I didn't understand. I didn't know it all until, I didn't know what a felon was until then.
William Golden, 23 years old and caught in the grip of the criminal justice system, arrested for burglary just after his 18th birthday. He spent only 3 months in jail, but the label felon remains, even though he's never committed another crime.
They expect you to be this violent, crazy, stupid person. Like when I graduated, I had 12 scholarships, but because I got a felony, people look at me a whole nother type of way.
William's story is not uncommon in Memphis. Many employers won't hire felons.
I think there's a strong case to be made that we have implemented criminal justice policies that impact people of color and that control people of color in a way that Jim Crow laws did and in a way that before that slavery did.
Josh Spickler, a former public defender, calls mass incarceration the new Jim Crow. Shelby County's incarceration rate is 3 times the rest of the country. On any given day, blacks make up 85 to 90% of the Shelby County jail, yet they're only 60% of the county's population.
Walk through 201 Poplar, walk through the juvenile court, and you'll see it. It's too, you can't ignore it.
Spickler and some others believe urban neighborhoods are often over-policed and blacks targeted more than whites. Out of the street! A study by the Department of Justice after the deadly Ferguson police shooting revealed it was true there.
Whether it be stop and frisk in New York, whether it be Blue Crush in Memphis, or whether we want to call that data-driven policing, or what they're trying to call in the current iteration predictive policing, supported by the quote-unquote Fed Up campaign. I think these all speak to a philosophy of policing that leads to disproportionate contact with people of color.
Dr. King fought battles through the justice system, winning change through legislation. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed discrimination in public places and in the workplace. President Lyndon Johnson even handed the civil rights leader a pen during the signing of the 1965 Voting Rights Act that removed barriers that kept blacks from voting. 50 years later, the halls of government are still battlegrounds.
we're having in a different context, right? Today, that conversation frequently revolves around criminal justice reform efforts and mass incarceration, whether or not African Americans disproportionately interact with the criminal justice system.
Tennessee State Senator Lee Harris says they must work to change laws that lead to mass incarceration. He names the drug-free school zone law from the 90s as one of the worst.
On the face of the matter, that sounds pretty good. But the reality is that that prison sentence is disproportionate because you would get about 15 years inside a school zone versus about 29 months outside of a school zone. And consider this, where are the school zones? For the most part, the school zones are in urban areas.
Harris says the state legislature made positive gains by lowering fees for a select group of felons to get their criminal records expunged. There's also legislation pending to allow felons to apply for state licenses like those needed to work as cosmetologists or barbers. And Harris backs a bill to encourage employers to hire felons.
We heard from a lot of employers, and a lot of those employers say, I'm not going to hire an ex-con because if something happens on the job, I will be sued. And so this certificate of employability insulates them from liability.
This former public defender founded Just City to also address problems he saw clients face after their cases ended. He believes its mission aligns with Dr. King's vision.
The work that Just City does and the work that so many folks are doing around criminal justice in this community are working with the addict, working with the person who can't afford a lawyer, working with the person who can't afford a $450 expungement fee. I mean, those are the voiceless in our community today.
I can make you cry and want to hit things.
Spickler says people should be able to move past a mistake, especially after years of doing the right thing.
The people who do the work, finance them more, get them more resources. Like let us like create options for ourselves. And we don't get that. That's what we need. We don't need more programs. We need more options.
Breathe in and stretch out your slinky.
William joined Lifeline to Success, a program that steers ex-offenders away from crime by providing counseling and jobs.
His cries grew.
He's also part of Playback. He goes into Shelby County schools teaching fifth graders improv theater.
I want to go back to school. I want to go to college, four-year college. And but my goal now is to help kids where I'm from, learn something new, learn better things than I learned growing up, or see different stuff, expose them to things that they wouldn't have been exposed to. Because I could just sit at home all day and do nothing, or go back to what I know. But I know for a fact it ain't gonna lead me nowhere. Because my whole thing is I want to change the world. I want to be a philosopher.
One person can shape the future of so many others. Dr. King used his voice to impact people around the world, and it's inspiring teachers to make their voices heard to future generations.
Dr. Martin Luther King, he left a legacy, and I encourage my students, to create their own legacy, no matter what it is. It may not look the way Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy looked, but just find things, in the world that you're passionate about and create your own legacy.
Dr. King was seen as many things to many people, including a possible communist to the FBI. Federal agents had him under constant surveillance with the goal of monitoring and disrupting the civil rights movement.
The operations established files on civil rights activists and recruiters to the movement. Agents posed as journalists, used wiretaps, and even recruited some civil rights figures as informants.
The FBI determined after Marshall Washington to destroy Dr. King. They sought to disrupt, discredit, and destroy Dr. King because they saw him as a threat, and in fact, he was therapy.
One of those informants was a close friend and confidant of Dr. King, Ernest Withers. Withers is the man behind many pictures that gained international fame. A clerical error exposed Withers in 2010, showing that he got paid to snitch.
Dr. King had hundreds, maybe even thousands of people working against him and his fight for equality. Opponents ranged from the FBI to national and local political leaders.
Henry Loeb was mayor of Memphis and refused to recognize the efforts and demands of Memphis sanitation workers.
Loeb refused to take dilapidated, deadly trucks out of service and refused overtime pay, though men worked hard around the clock.
The position of the city as to the illegality of the strike is the same on the day as when it began. The futility of 44 days of not drawing pay should be a clear warning to others that the city will stand up for what's right.
Mayor Henry Loeb was elected mayor of Memphis in 1968. Conditions for black people in the city went downhill after his election.
1965 was supposed to grant African Americans the right to vote. But in the South, many of those wishing to cast ballots were subjected to mistreatment and violence.
You would never understand what it's like to be black in a white society where you're treated less than a human being.
Voices that speak of the emotional and physical brutality and despair of segregation of more than 50 years ago.
Fought and died. People met all sort of horrendous obstacles and terror to keep them away from the ballot box.
And photos that almost speak and show the civil rights movement and how they helped change America one image at a time. Images almost frozen in time. But 50 years later, raw emotions still melt the heart and bring back to life memories of what many people fought for, marched for, and died for.
As I walked to the back of the bus, of the anger, the agony, and what really capped it off, the white kids laughed.
Painful memories for a former bank teller and school teacher turned Memphis civil rights icon, Johnny Turner. Mrs. Turner marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and was there to hear his last speech in Memphis. The now Tennessee state representative recalls sitting on the back of a bus as a second-grade student and the one encounter at Maine and Gayoso that forever changed her.
And the whites got on and they sat down, and then this white girl about my age got on and she said, "Mama, look at all the niggers in the back." That cut through me like electric shock. All at once I said, I'm sitting back here because I'm black.
It was one defining moment in time that would later inspire one woman to be part of sit-ins, fight against Jim Crow laws, and fight for the right to vote in the South.
That's how we got started. I knew how important voting was because the decisions that were being made to keep us down were a result of laws.
We must continue to take that short walk to the voting booth. We must go to the ballot box and vote in large numbers, recognizing the importance of it.
In Memphis and throughout the South, there were other foot soldiers, or movement warriors as they were called. They marched to make a difference in the lives of others, especially when it came to the right to vote.
As a result, we made progress, significant progress with the ballot. It was either the ballot or the bullet.
Shelby County Commissioner Walter Bailey and his late brother, Judge DeArmey Bailey, were two young Memphians taking part in demonstrations and sit-ins in a culture for change.
You just become perpetually part of a struggle for improvement for your people.
The Baileys, even during their years in college, wanted to use the ballot as a revolutionary tool for progress.
Conditions were so oppressive, and the ballot was the answer, as we thought, to a condition improvement. You fighting for your rights with the ballot, getting the right office holders in, voting for the right programs.
The ballot in 1991 attracted more than 60% of black voters who helped Dr. Willie Harrington become Memphis's first elected African-American mayor. But in recent years, black voter turnout in Memphis has declined, especially after the election of President Barack Obama. And some say apathy and complacency has set in for some voters.
Until the events become of such that people really can feel the effects of the setbacks and the regression of progress, until they can feel that, then it's going to be difficult to get their attention, to get them committed to the ballot.
But today, some say even if voters are committed to the ballot, there are possible new roadblocks 50 years later. Some Memphis lawmakers claim Tennessee's strict voter ID law amounts to voter suppression and unfairly targets certain groups such as minorities.
Voter suppression, the voter ID, as I said earlier, it's just a means of intimidation. I mean, you don't have to have an ID to vote, you know, a picture ID, because that excludes a number of people who are not eligible.
Today, the NAACP is trying to help educate black millennials about the value of voting.
People actually died for this right, for them to have that opportunity.
Memphis chapter president Deidre Malone says they're launching a campaign with the National Civil Rights Museum called VIP 901. Voting is power.
Some of them may not have, felt like they've been discriminated against, have had some of the obstacles that some of us may have had in the past, but they have. They just don't realize that some of it may be due to racism, and that, electing people and paying attention to the election process is important.
An important process ingrained in the soul of Johnny Turner today, just like it was 50 years ago in these pictures. Pictures with a timeless message for millennials about the blood, sweat, and tears sacrificed for the right to vote today.
Somebody may have paid the price for you, and voting was our weapon. Voting was our tool. You can't stop voting. If you allow me to vote and you don't pull any tricks, I can win this game.
President Barack Obama's election to Oval Office fostered new hope in communities all across the nation. He drew inspiration from Dr. King during his time in office.
Just as we celebrate the progress he helped inspire, we recommit ourselves to our unfinished work, defending the dignity and equality of all people.
Equal opportunity in the classroom was a big part of Dr. King's campaign for civil rights, and few will argue we've made enormous progress in opportunity and access to better education.
When the Supreme Court ordered an end to segregation, some assumed the battle had been won, the struggle was over, and the result would be a quality education for everyone. But after much research, we've discovered reality rarely measures up to the ideal.
School systems were segregated. We had no blacks on the school board. I'm the product of a racially segregated school system.
From segregation to integration, Willie Harrington knows the view from the valley.
Are you ready to take the oath of office
and the mountaintop
of the great city of Memphis?
And he'll be the first to acknowledge his pathway to Memphis City Hall started in segregated Memphis City schools.
Many black scholars will contend that when the schools were segregated, we had better teachers that really cared about us, understood our culture and all of that.
Cautiously arguing, the hallways of equal education were complicated by the nation's reaction to integration.
Some scholars will argue that integration really place African Americans in some kind of cultural shackle.
Black scholars, white scholars, confounded by the complexity of integration.
You look at, at some of the historic black schools in our community, and people look back with such nostalgia and say, oh, integration ruined them. And
Daniel Keel is a graduate of Harvard Law and currently a law professor at the University of Memphis.
But only because integration was enacted in such a way that tilted the burden almost exclusively on the African American communities. It wasn't available.
Professor Keel lectures frequently on segregation and has researched and written extensively on civil rights.
We have systems in place.
He grew up in integrated Memphis City schools.
So you look at Booker T. Washington, you look at Melrose, and you see that's where the students were taken from. That's where the teachers were taken from. Those are the schools whose resources, they weren't receiving anything in the other direction. And I think that has had a long-term impact on those communities.
The professor believes unintended consequences of court-ordered integration are still being felt today.
They view it negatively. They say it didn't get me the opportunities that the law was saying I was entitled to. Instead, it got me burdens in trying to fix this problem that we didn't cause in the first place.
Decades later, Memphis is still trying to fix that problem.
I can't
say or lament enough that there have been some challenges.
But Shante Avant, chair of the Shelby County School Board, says we can't ignore the victories.
We had 16 schools come off of our bottom 5 list just in this past year. That's something for us to be proud of.
The district can also boast it has 4 nationally ranked high schools and 35 schools performing in the top 5% of the state. Yet even the superintendent realizes more needs to be done.
You know, obviously equal access and equal opportunity is big, and those are some huge wins. You know, we still have a long way to go because I think the ghosts of poverty still haunt us.
And those ghosts make the challenge that much harder.
You have to be conditioned to take advantage of the equal access and equal opportunity, right?
What do you mean?
I think that you have to, you know, I think we as educators are charged with creating those opportunities, but then kids have to, you know, take advantage of those opportunities.
Which is more difficult than it might seem. Because while the district has shown consistent improvement over the past several years, a thorough examination of statistics from the Tennessee Department of Education reveals the Shelby County School District is one of the lowest performing districts in the state, consistently underperforming for years, even with well above average resources.
You're going to write.
There were 146 school districts in Tennessee last year. Only 3 spent more money per student than Shelby County. All 3 had higher graduation rates than Shelby. In fact, while Shelby County has seen increases in graduation rates for the past 4 years, its graduation rate is still 10 points behind the state average. Indeed, it's almost the lowest in the state, just ahead of the Achievement District and the Tennessee School for the Deaf.
Well, I think in comparison to those statistics that you just named, we're also the poorest district in the state, right?
That's true, but the more affluent districts in our area are spending less and getting different results.
But I think that if we are only focused on the challenges and not the successes we have been able to achieve, it doesn't continue to give our kids hope. It doesn't give our teachers hope. It doesn't give our community hope.
Beyond the educational outcome, there's another issue facing the district.
Is resegregation a thing? And if it is, how long has it been going on?
It's hard to say that resegregation is a thing because that implies that there was a period where we didn't have segregated schools.
That's not an exaggeration. Legally mandated segregation was abolished, but many schools in Tennessee remain heavily segregated by race.
There remain significant numbers of schools where they're exclusively people of color, students of color, and those are the schools that are most vulnerable to lack of equitable opportunities for their students.
Which has led some families to lose faith in Shelby County schools. They say they left the inner city in pursuit of better performing districts and what they believe is a safer school environment. We confirm that with numerous families, both black and white. Unfortunately, white families didn't want to talk on camera, fearing they'd be labeled racist. And black families didn't want to talk, afraid of being marked as a sellout or a traitor.
Come here, man.
But we also found parents who are all in on Shelby County schools.
This is Sydney, she's 21. Braden is 6. Hannah is 5.5. Jeffrey, Michael, and Jackson are our triplets, and they're 3.
Matt and Tiffany Nason have 6 children and have chosen to live in Midtown and send their kids to school there.
Snowden was one of the best schools in the city of Memphis. You know, a lot of people are saying, man, that's just like one of the best schools.
But also believing diversity in the classroom is a vital part of the educational experience.
We hope for them to learn that doing life with people who may not necessarily look like you is really important, and knowing that just because someone is different in the way that they look or talk or speak, that we can still love them the same.
I believe in what we're doing in this district. I believe in the opportunities we can continue to create for our kids.
2 men that saw Dr. King's final moments in Memphis say America still has work to do, but change is here and change is happening now.
I think there was tension in the entire Memphis community over Dr. King's presence and our coming here. But one of the things that we've noticed on this trip and the last few times I've been to Memphis is that there's a new spirit here.
The fact is we are a better nation because of the struggles. We are living in the New South. The architecture of the New South is our civil rights struggle. No Southern governor or senator can take credit for bringing in the New South.
our nonviolent struggle, massive struggle, worker struggle, working people struggle brought in. And so much of that history is rooted right here in how we treat the least of it. How we treat sanitation workers is a measure of our character.
During the height of the civil rights era, there was a clear line of individuals who became the faces of the movement.
They were the clear leaders, and everyone seemed to unite right behind them. But how has that changed in 50 years?
They think it's a joke!
If what was old is new again, then recent protests, sit-ins, and rallies in Memphis are no surprise. A new group of leaders picking up issues that seem to have been dormant instead of overcome. Police shootings, racial profiling, poverty. They all came to a head on a hot summer day on a bridge in Memphis.
Just tired of the way things are for so many of us, and I think that was the prevailing sentiment that led people to the bridge. They were just fed up and they were tired and they didn't know what else to do, and so this was a thing that they could do.
Shahida Jones was among thousands of young protesters who shut down the I-40 bridge in July 2016.
Don't shoot! Hands up!
And the bridge was stopped, and so there was just this energy and this sense of triumph, and people were just excited that they were able to control some small piece of something.
Close to 50 years earlier, civil rights pioneers shut down another bridge, the Edmund Pettus in Selma, Alabama, demanding equality and change. It became Bloody Sunday as protesters were attacked, among them civil rights legend John Lewis.
The time is always right to do right. To stand up, to speak up, and to never give up.
Congressman Lewis recently led a pilgrimage across several states to commemorate that time. I asked him about the new generation of protesters still pushing for change.
We must be hopeful, optimistic, and never lose that sense of hope. I think the young people, I think the children are going to help us get there.
One thing that stands out about then and now, factions of leadership. When this bridge protest was over that summer, it brought out several people claiming leadership roles. It became confusing. Who was the face of this movement?
I answer to the public.
The Monday after the protest, a meeting to talk issues turned into chaos. Everyone wanting to speak and not everyone on the same page. Shahida Jones says while that meeting was uncontrollable, the different voices speaking out for different issues was quite reminiscent of the 60s.
It was 15 different groups. They argued, they fought about whether or not they should be talking about the $2 minimum wage or if this was not the right time. There was always multiple groups going. So you always had Martin Luther King, and then before Martin Luther King, you had Malcolm X, you had Stokely Carmichael, you had SNCC, and you had all of these groups.
We're gonna be out here every day.
Black Lives Matter Memphis then took to Graceland, protesting economic injustice.
Don't drag no woman!
We wanted to point out the huge injustice of investing so much money into Graceland while communities in our city remain divested from. Schools in our community are closing. Many people in our community cannot find housing.
During the civil rights movement, it was lunch counter sit-ins and business boycotts. Elaine Turner was among the students demanding change then.
Those wheels were turning very slowly in the courts. So when the students decided that they were going to step out and take matters into their own hand, that's when they decided that we're going to do something.
Libraries were finally integrated after Turner, her family, and young people led library sit-ins and went to jail. Today, young people are still speaking out just as loud about injustices they see.
When these young people see others their own age being mistreated, being beaten, and yes, even being shot down, they are saying, that's enough. We are human beings. We need to be respected. Our lives do matter.
But like in the 1960s, sometimes it's not just demonstrating, but speaking loudly and not letting up that finally brings change.
We haven't gotten there yet, and we have a lot more to do.
Tammy Sawyer became the face of that late last year when after relentless pushing to remove Confederate statues in Memphis, she finally saw them come down.
I don't believe that it was an agenda item for 2017, and so I believe that our push and just bringing along a lot of people in the community in that push, and a lot of folks are saying, you know, now is the time, definitely made it happen in the timeline that it happened.
Sawyer says Take 'Em Down 901 was finishing the work.
We're picking up the torch and continuing the next leg of the race. So when I look at Lucinda Gray and I look at, you know, Commissioner Bailey, I look at them as, you know, the people we took the baton from in the race.
In 1968, we were focused on getting a fair wage for the sanitation workers, which would eventually impact everybody in Memphis. But we didn't think about in 1968 the power of these monuments. But they have tremendous power. They are a constant reminder, Negro, stay in your place.
The Reverend Lucinda Gray was one of those who led the fight years later in 2005, pushing for Memphis to take down the Confederate monuments, taking a stand and taking all that came with it.
Our homes had to be guarded all night by local law enforcement. The Klan came from all over the Mid-South to prevent or really to intimidate us about even talking about those statues and the removal thereof.
He says young leaders who were not willing to back down pushed open the doors he and others had cracked.
Mrs. Sawyer is to be commended for keeping that fight alive, and Mayor Strickland is to be commended for making it happen.
A number of people in and out of Memphis agree that while Memphis has made strides, there is still work that needs to be done. Memphis has taken action to help minority and women-owned businesses develop and work in and with the city. But while businesses are popping up, only a select number of them are tapping into the resources provided. Business owners who have been here for years say they know why.
Let me put it like this. It's easy to talk black, but it's hard to be black. And what I mean about that when you are working for somebody else, you don't see really what's being experienced like you do when you have your own minority-owned business. And it's a lot of money in Memphis. It's a lot of money here. But it's not touching the whole community. It's only touches certain people and certain communities. And that needs to change.
Dr. Martin
As he came out about 3 minutes after he had come out, the shot rang out.
April 4th, 1968, at the Lorraine Motel, a single gunshot from an assassin's rifle would leave a painful and unforgettable scar on Memphis, and one that would change the world forever. The Reverend Samuel Billy Kiles was on the second-floor balcony with Dr. King that haunting night and talked to WREG about the seconds before gunfire rang out and silenced the civil rights leader.
In the motel room, getting out, getting ready to go to dinner. I was going to my house for dinner, as a matter of fact.
But at 6:01 p.m., that evening would turn into a night of horror and heartbreak for Memphis and the nation. Reverend Kiles would be the witness of Dr. King's last moments as he stepped out of the motel room where he was staying, room 306.
Got to about this point here, and we heard what sounded just like a firecracker, a loud, real loud shot. And I heard somebody holler, "Oh, Lord."
In the friend's words, the bullet exploded in his face.
A single shot fired by James O'Ray from more than 200 feet away struck Dr. King in the neck.
Then I turned around and went back to where he was, and he had fallen backwards. And the wound was in this area here.
On the right side of his jaw?
Yes, I suspect it was right side.
Dr. King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, but at 7 o'clock Memphis time, the announcement came that would shake an already racially turbulent Memphis and America.
They rushed the 39-year-old Negro leader to a hospital where he died of a bullet wound in the neck.
Violence would erupt in Memphis and major cities. Police cars were stoned. Molotov cocktails were thrown, sparking fires. Beale Street experienced looting. The Tennessee National Guard tanks rolled into town, and police made hundreds of arrests. Memphis and the nation were left asking painfully why. Why would someone silence the voice that had energized America's civil rights movement and the voice that had challenged our nation to live up to its highest ideals.
The black people's leader, our Moses, the once in a 400 or 500 year leader, has been taken from us by hatred and bitterness.
50 years after Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination, we spoke with Reverend Jesse Jackson. Jackson remembers the night of April 4th as if it were yesterday.
Dr. King called on a Friday night late and said, I want to meet early in the morning. So I said, we'll try to make it. We began adjusting schedules. We sat around talking much of the day. He and Andrew pillow fighting. It was kind of ebullient, kind of fun that day.
The men would soon split up, planning to get back together later that evening for dinner.
I kept sending signals. It was time to go, Doc, so he finally came in around 6. Jesse, you're late. I said, Doc, you know you're late. We're supposed to be there at 5 o'clock. Go in and prepared food for us. You don't even have on a shirt and tie. And we're going to dinner with Reverend Kyles. So Doc, the prerequisite of eating is not a tie, it's an appetite. He said, you're crazy. We laughed. They looked down and saw Ben and said, Ben, you should play my favorite song for me tonight, Precious Lord. He said, I will. And he raised it. I said, Doc, he raised it, pow. And knocked him back against this. Dr. King's been shot. There's somebody said, get low, because I remember dashing toward those steps. As the picture was pointing, we were pointing because police were coming this way with guns drawn. So the bullet didn't come from here. The bullet came from that way. That's what that picture's trying to say. The bullet came from that way. Mr. Willis, the photographer, he scooped up a couple of jars of blood. He said, this is meaningful. It's too eerie. I remember Abernathy saying, get back, my friends. Martin, don't leave us now. It's going to be all right. So I got up, wiped myself off, and went to the room where I was staying next door and called Mrs. King. She said, Jesse, I'm lying there reading. I said, Mrs. King, I said, Dr. King has been shot. I think he's been shot in the shoulder. I really couldn't say what I saw. Like, it was too much to say. She said, I think you should come. I think upon the impact, he felt nothing else. The bullet hit him. I remember it severed his tie. Went down and exploded and blew his heart out. His eyes were rolling back. As he ever knocked out, I was talking with him, his eyes were rolling back. And she said, I'll be there. And I suppose in maybe 5 or 10 minutes, Associated Press, somebody called her, said he was dead. I was very angry for a few days because the same people who had been so anti-Martin Luther King, I mean, the week before he was killed, he was 52% negative in among blacks. Because they thought he should have been focusing more on the civil rights movement. And they fortified my determination to do this the rest of my life. And I've not stopped since that day. It took it to another dimension because my responsibilities got so great so fast. When I went into a problem, I could always call him at home. Or we'd meet and we could talk. But with my pillow gone, I had to do a lot of swimming without any further instructions. I was thrust way out there real fast.
Jackson says he has no idea where he'd be without Dr. King and his influence.
There's no way of telling where I would be, or where any of us would be. As an 89-year-old man, a philosopher, retired maybe from preaching, he would be seen differently. He will forever be 39. Martyrs take on an eternal life of their own, so he'll never be older than 39. He'll forever be a young Baptist minister. He's only 39. He was only 39, and he took away so much so quick.
Dr. King's wife, Coretta Scott King, continued her husband's mission. Even after his assassination, 4 days later, on April 8th, she led a silent march in Memphis in honor of her late husband's fight for equality. Elmore Nickelberry, other striking sanitation workers, and a woman named Georgia King all took part.
When Sister Cartwright came back to Memphis to finish the march, I'm the vanguard that was leading the march.
The sanitation workers stayed off the job but on the streets for 64 days, fighting for better treatment, better wages, and for their union, ASME, to be recognized.
Mayor Loeb finally relented 12 days after the assassination of Dr. King.
For the first time in the history of Memphis, city employees are going to be paid equally for equal jobs.
Beginning September 1st, 1968, the said employees will receive an additional increase in pay of 5 cents per hour. In other words, you get 10 cents now and 5 cents more on September 1st, 1968, for a total of 15 cents.
Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign fizzled out after his death. But last year, young activists breathed new life into the organization to help bring about the moral revival Dr. King preached about.
So often, we overlook the worth and the significance of those who are not in professional jobs.
We didn't have no pension. We ain't got no pension now. They just give $70,000, and that's all they give us.
Mayor Strickland even worked out a deal to give sanitation employees like Nickelberry a one-time retirement grant paired with a supplemental retirement plan.
We needed to bridge the gap between what other city employees receive in retirement and what the sanitation employees to receive.
So I appreciate that, because at one time we been picking on giving nothing. So I'm glad I did that.
Mayor Strickland says almost every city job pays more than $15 an hour. But that's not the case with many other jobs in the Mid-South. So the fight continues in honor of what Dr. King and others started.
I think it would be proud of the people coming out. It's like a rainbow, you know, all different nationalities coming out. You have people that are from other nationalities, for example, and it makes them feel that they're not alone, that we are together, we are as one, and we're fighting, even though the causes might be different within their own neighborhoods, but we are together.
Dr. King stood on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel and yelled some of his final words.
He said, "I want you to play Precious Lord for me. Play it real pretty."